This is our From Live to Online series brought to you by Unique Speaker Bureau International. I am Melissa Tsodetsi, your customer manager, and I have the incredible privilege of setting the stage for speaker Major Mandisa Mfeka. When I think of Mandisa, I think of the words of Marie Furlow, who once said, "Success does not come from what you do occasionally. It comes from what you do consistently." Major Mandisa Mfeka made history as the first Black female combat pilot in the South African Air Force. With over 14 years of aviation experience, she has flown advanced combat aircraft, led prestigious flypasts, including at President Cyril Ramaphosa's inauguration, and currently serves at Air Force Command Headquarters as an air show planner. Beyond this, Major Mandisa is a passionate advocate for youth empowerment and gender equity in STEM fields, volunteering for the Girls Fly program in Africa. Her accolades include the Charlotte Mañana Award for Excellence in Aviation and recognition as a national role model. An engaging keynote speaker and master of ceremonies, Major Mandisa brings a compelling message of resilience, leadership, and challenging the status quo, perfectly captured in her motto, "The sky is the baseline." Without further ado, allow me to welcome Mandisa. Mandisa, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Melissa. That was such a beautiful introduction. And greetings also to all our audience, and thank you so much for your time. As Melissa has mentioned, my name is Major Mandisa Mfeka, and I have actually served in the Air Force for 16 years and 8 months. So I'm giving away my age a bit there. But I think we can just be grateful for some water and some of that military exercise. So yes, my story began at the young age of 5 years old when my mother decided one day that she would pack all of us up, my family members, my cousins, into her car with my grandmother, and she decided to take a drive to an area. Naturally, anytime that we get into the car, it's always a promise from the beach. I'm from Durban, so anytime we get excited, we jump into the car, it means it's a promise of the beach. And on this particular day, we noticed that the route was different, and we thought to ourselves, okay, this is not to the beach, but any outing is always, an excitement when you're a child. And she parked her car once we reached destination at the fence, and she invited all of us out. But we were a bit bewildered, we looked around, we're like, but this is not the beach. And I remember that day so brightly. It was, we were standing by the fence, and I saw helicopters dancing in the sky. I saw aircraft flying together in formation, aerobatics. I didn't have the vocabulary back then, but it was very exciting. And I remember an aircraft came thundering past, and it was painted in cheetah stripes, and the windows shook, and the young children started crying because they were shocked by the shock of the sound. And I remember something in my heart was moved. At that stage, we didn't have enough to get into the air show itself, but I remembered that day so vividly. And I started doing research about careers in maths and science when I was in grade 10, and I came across an advert by the South African Air Force recruiting pilots and navigators. And for me, that's when the penny dropped. I ran down to my father and I shouted, Dad, look, we have an Air Force. We're a country, aren't we? He looked up at me, and I saw a question mark in his face. And also I saw a little bit of inhibition because I was showing him an Air Force an advert about the Air Force, and I wanted to go into this industry. And for him, he was a bit nervous. His eldest daughter wanted to go and join the military forces. And for him, it was a bit nerve-wracking because, there's a very real threat of violence, and it's a part that he cannot protect anyone or his daughters from. And I remember when I mentioned it to my grandmother that I wanted to join the South African Air Force, she said to me, which basically means just say that you want to be a soldier. Where have you seen something like that? And I said, no, Gogo, I want to fly the soldiers. I don't want to be a soldier. And, so that's when the journey began for me. Let me just see. If I can just quickly share a bit of my background and my history. Right, we seeing a presentation here? Just show me
Yes,
a
we
thumbs up.
are.
Perfect. Yeah, so my story is about navigating turbulence and stepping into authentic power. Because once I discovered the South African Air Force and I knew that's what I wanted to do, I began writing to them already in my 10th grade. Okay, there we go. As Melissa has mentioned, I am actually a retired military pilot, now corporate pilot. I served for 16 years and 8 months in the South African Air Force. I received my wings in 2011, and in 2018, I had the honor of flying at the inauguration of our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and then again in 2024, leading the formation. And I'm a huge, huge advocate for STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and maths. There's something that comes with being a trailblazer or being a person who goes into the path less traveled, is that most times you have to carve out the path. But the important thing is that once you shatter those glass ceilings, as leaders, it is our responsibility to ensure that we are not the only, but we ensure that we multiply. So we hold those doors open so that we can have more leaders, we can have more advocates, we can have more combat pilots, people who are passionate about their industry. So that is why I feel so passionate about sharing the story and my journey, so that we can maybe leave a little bit of an insight, maybe to share with your colleagues, with your family members, or perhaps ignite something in you. If there's a dream that you decided to put away, realize that it is possible. There's a beautiful saying by Paulo Coelho, and it's one of my favorite books, The Alchemist, and that is that when you want something, the universe conspires to help you achieve it. And upon realizing that I wanted to join the South African Air Force, I started writing to them. I started writing letters. I wanted them to know about this young girl from KZN, wanted to join as a pilot. And, I kept sending those letters through. And it wasn't until my matric year, after I came back from hockey, I was a bit of a tomboy. I used to follow my dad to the soccer field. And I remember a time when my mom wanted me to stay with her, and I just didn't want to stay with my mother. I wanted to go and follow my dad to the soccer field. And it was always just that thing that we were brought up with, is that what women or young girls are able to do is no different from what men and boys can do. So I was always challenging the boys on the soccer field, and that set the foundation for me, actually, when I was finally selected to join the South African Air Force. Let me just give you a perspective of what the selection process actually looked like. Out of 400 candidates in my group, who were 8 groups in total, the number of people that went through the entire selection process, which was a psychometric test, a psychomotor test, which is the hand-eye coordination test, measurements, flight medicals to ensure that you have good vision and you're strong enough and fit enough to fly in the combat area, was the number of people that completed the full selection process was 12 out of that entire group. And out of those 12, only 2 were female. So it really goes to show how competitive the industry is and how much space there really is still for more people to come in. So that is also why I'm so very, very grateful about being afforded these platforms so that we can share the story. I remember after I completed the selection process and I received my appointment letter to come and do the basic military training, we arrived there at the gates of Valhalla as young recruits, very excited with our bags in tow. And I remember they were bright-eyed, we were excited, we were finally going to become military aviators. And we were standing there with all of the items which we were told to bring. I remember looking at that appointment letter and noticing that there was a large amount of polish that we had to pack. Nonetheless, I was excited and we were standing there. And a gentleman approached us in uniform. I didn't know the rank at the time, but he was a sergeant. And the moment he was within earshot, he shouted, "Everything on your left." We looked at him a bit bewildered. Everything on our left, sir. We've got baggage, we've got luggage, we've got ironing boards. There is absolutely no way that we can balance everything on our left. And then he shouted again, everything on your left. Then we realized the seriousness of the situation. So we balanced everything on our left and we pulled our luggage and we followed him. And he showed us to what would become our home for the duration of training. I remember looking at that bungalow and there were 12 beds all lined up. We called them braai stands because they were made out of metal frames and the mattress was very, very thin. And he told us that we had to treat this as our home. So we had to clean it and bring it to the level of military inspection. I remember looking at the floor and realizing how dusty it was. And at that moment, I was looking down. He told us that, you see this floor, the way that it is so dusty today, tomorrow when I come back for inspection, I want the floor to shine to such an extent that it competes with the shine of my shoe. And mind you, his shoes were a mirror finish. That is how much they shine. And at that moment, I realized why it was we were told to pack all of that polish. So we began working. We swept, we dusted, we buffed, we applied polish onto the floor. We began ironing our beds because at military standard, the beds has to have sharp corners that they stand erect and straight. And we had to iron our pillows, line up our cutlery on the pillows, and the overalls that we had to be ironed so that the seam stands sharp in the cupboards lined up. We worked the entire evening, and once some of my colleagues noticed how pristine the area looked, they decided that the bed was too good to sleep on, and they decided to sleep underneath the bed, waiting for inspection. And those were some of the sacrifices we had to make to ensure that we met the standard for inspection. The next morning, the leader, we called her the bungalow bull because for us it didn't make sense to call her a cow, stood outside waiting for the sergeant. And the moment that he approached, she shouted, "Attention!" And we all stood to attention. Immediately, the sergeant walked in, inspected the floors, came over and inspected our uniform to ensure that it was in pristine condition, went over and looked at our beds and measured the cutlery to see that it was in the correct spacing. Then he did something that I was not waiting for. He decided to get on top of the bed of one of my colleagues and then proceeded to reach for the curtain rail and run his hands over the curtain rail. Surprise, surprise, he found dust, which meant that we had failed inspection. It was a cold Pretoria morning. I'll never forget it. There was frost on the grass, and he decided that we didn't know how to use our hands. So he was going to teach us how to use our hands by commanding us to leopard crawl on the frost. It was so cold and it was so bitter. And I remember our hands getting really, really numb. But I looked over at my colleague and I saw in that moment there was a look of defiance, something in her which showed that I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of seeing me break. And in that moment, I was inspired and I also latched on to that spirit and we pushed through, not satisfied with the fact that we were not giving up. The sergeant then called us back all inside our bungalows and there was a metal chest, we call them trommels, with all of our personal belongings. It was quite heavy. I'd say that it weighed around 8 to 9 kilograms. And at that stage, with those thin handles and numb hands, it was very painful to lift those up, and we had to march in the spots to show that we could handle that pressure. And in the military, there's that philosophy, and that is to break you down in order to build you up. As civilians, I think most of us, we have all of our rights. We tend to question things. However, once you're in the military, there isn't time to question anything. When a command is given, the moment that you hesitate,
You could miss the target. You could miss that window for you to deliver your ordinance. And that is what they were teaching us. But I remember thinking there to myself that at that moment, I was G.I. Jane. I was inspired by that moment where she went in and she was the first. And I thought of myself as G.I. Jane. And I would do every push-up in order to get stronger and also to build my strength so that I could get that one pull-up. And in that moment, looking over, I realized that all of our colleagues were G.I. Janes. At that moment, there was something creative that we had to call from ourselves. We had to create solutions to the challenges that we experienced. Sometimes it was very cold, and then sometimes it was very hot. And the conditions were always that you had to adapt to your immediate environment. We were going against the grain. And at that moment also, I realized that there wasn't a single time that I looked over at my colleagues and I saw them, feeling sorry for themselves. At that moment, I saw them bringing up the courage, and that inspired us. There's a beautiful, beautiful saying by Oprah Winfrey, and that is, challenges are a gift that force us to search for a new center of gravity. Don't fight them. Just find a new way to stand. Once we completed the basic military training, I remember saying to myself that one day, once I qualify, I will get that sergeant who made us leopard crawl in the frost and made us run up. We had a hill at Valhalla, which was called Sahara, because it was so dry and dusty. And sometimes, you would feel the rocks as you were tumbling down that hill. And I remember thinking to myself that one day when I qualify, I am going to get that sergeant to salute me. The way that the rank structure is set up in the military is that when you join, your rank is airman, then you progress through as you qualify, you become a lance corporal, then it's a corporal, then sergeant, flight sergeant, and then there are two streams that you can choose. You can either become a warrant officer, which is sort of like your line managers or your section heads, or you can become an officer, which is your specialists, your engineers, your navigators and pilots. And the rank structure there, the officers start at candidate officer, then you become a second lieutenant, then you become a captain, and after you have completed the junior officers ranks, then you become a major. And looking at that path that was set for me, I was pretty sure that one day I would be at a rank where the sergeant who had given us grief at basic military training would need to salute me. However, once I did qualify, looking at the ranks and I met him as Major Brav, and standing before him was Major Mfeka. I never got that salute. We were the same rank. And it just goes to show that you must always be open to the learning. At the end of the day, it's the philosophy. Eventually, we got to the military academy and we started with our flying training, and it was a ground school where we did subjects like physical science on the first year level, mathematics, as well as aeronautical science. And thereafter we started at the aviation fly. We were the group that began flying on the Cessna C-172. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Cessna C-172 is that small white aircraft which is fixed wing, and it has struts on its wings. And when you hit full power, it sounds like a mosquito as it takes power. It goes mee as it rotates. And I remember getting to that aircraft and looking inside the cabin, which was a cockpit, and wondering to myself that, will I really be able to learn this flying in the way that would pass the grade? Would I really become the military aviator that I had aspired to? All through my training to that point, there was never an inkling of doubt. However, that first time when I looked at that aircraft, I felt a little voice starting to manifest. And what I recognized from that voice is that it is similar to an imposter. It will say things to you. It will bring you down and will sometimes steal from your confidence. And I remember feeling that little grain starting to manifest. The moment I got into the aircraft and then I was sitting at the controls and I hit full power, I looked over at the tarmac and I saw the wheel lift up and I was really inspired. And the moment that I continued and I was given control, I was excited. And that little voice was dialed down again. And I remember once we completed the entire, excuse me, the entire AB initial training, then it was time for me to go solo. When it was my solo check, the flight instructor, Miss Krebs, was seated next to me. She was a biggish woman. And she said to me, Mandisa, you have worked very, very hard to get to this point. Now, when I step out of this aircraft, I want you to realize that it's going to be the first time that you are alone in the aircraft. And it's going to climb like a fart in the water. And I remember thinking to her, Miss Krebs. But at that moment, it was just to bring those nerves down, to remember all the training that I had gone through, and for me to execute as I had been taught, and to have confidence. And eventually I got into that Cessna. I closed the door, I proceeded with my checks, and I taxied out to the runway. I hit full power, and that mosquito-sounding aircraft indeed did climb like an air bubble in the water, and I was affirmed. In those moments, those little voices of doubts were put away, and I completed the AB initial training and finally got to Langabanweg, where we started flying the PC-7. The PC-7, some of you may not know, is the Pilatus PC-7, where the Silver Falcons, which are the ambassadors of the Air Force, fly in formation. So that is the bread and butter of military aviation, to fly in formation. Formation flying has both a ceremonial and a tactical application. For the ceremonies, when we fly there in formation, it looks really great. It looks like a parade in the sky when the aircraft are flying next to each other. And with the tactical application is that when you're looking on a radar screen, every aircraft that is flying in an airspace gives a signal which shows that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, however many aircraft in the vicinity. So when we fly in close formation, that signal becomes a blur. It makes it very difficult for anyone who's observing that airspace to see how many elements are flying into the space. So it sort of gives that element of espionage, this surprise that you don't know how many elements are coming in. So it's tactical and is fundamental. When it was time for me to learn that aspect of formation flying, I remember thinking to myself that it's a bit difficult because during general flying, we're flying against a fixed horizon. You're looking at the sky, you're looking outside, and you're keeping the aircraft relative to a fixed point, flying in space. When you're flying in bad weather, you're looking at the instruments. And they are also, even though they are moving, they're giving you indications that you can read. However, when you're flying in close formation, you're flying next to another moving body that is climbing, turning, descending, and making maneuvers. And you, as you're trying to keep station, need to make those similar inputs in order to maintain that spacing. And when it was time for me to learn this aspect, I was feeling a little bit inhibited. Every time I came close to the aircraft, I would think to myself, am I too close? Am I going to knock into that aircraft? So I would hesitate and I would tense up against the controls. And when it was time for me to do my solo check, I remember after we had flown in formation with the instructor, we got onto the ground and he said to me, I don't think you have what it takes. I was shattered because at that point, I had pushed through so many challenges, but somehow when it came to formation flying, I couldn't overcome that fear, that hesitation. And immediately I didn't know what to do. I was practicing my drills. I was chair flying. I was visualizing. But when I'd get into the aircraft, I would tense up and I would be pulled away from the leader that I was trying to follow.
One of my instructors, upon realizing that I was struggling, said to me, Mandy, just cut the bread, cut the bread. I looked at him and I thought, cut the bread. And he said, yeah, just cut the bread, cut the bread. And I thought to myself, okay, cut the bread. What he was trying to say is that I need to minimize my control inputs and make them short and quick in succession, like cutting the bread. But more so, as I'm doing that motion, to relax against the controls. Think of it as tapping on a racket with a tennis ball. If you give too much energy to the tennis ball, you actually lose control because it bounces and you have to make bigger inputs to catch it. But if you tap very, very lightly and quickly, it remains in position and you can control it, like cutting the bread. So I was offered an opportunity to do a little bit of remedial training, and I got into the aircraft. I was sitting in the front, and the moment I felt myself tense up, I would begin cutting the bread, and slowly, slowly moved from outer, and I would get closer, cutting the bread. And once I got close, I started noticing that the small inputs that my leader was making with the turns, I was able to visually comprehend, and I was maintaining station. And finally, the penny dropped, and I was able to fly in formation. What I learned at that stage was that my most challenging aspect, which was formation fly, became my most favored aspect, to such an extent that I was trusted to fly the Hawk Mach 120 jet at the inauguration of our president in formation. And that is the picture that you see there. That is Comet sitting in the front in solo formation, cutting the bread in the Hawk Mach 120. So really, sometimes we need to go against the grain and look at creative solutions to the problems that we have. But the biggest thing, though, is having self-belief. Because if somebody prescribes a solution to you and you don't have that self-belief, that remedy is not to stick. You know, when we look in the mirror, the person that we see could be our biggest fan or our biggest enemy. It really depends on what we say to that person in the mirror. So resilience, we have to push through sometimes, you know, small actions. I remember when we were doing our training in Hoedspruit, it was a hot day. And I remember the grass was so hot and we were doing what was the fit soldier exercise. And basically we had to do a fitness test where we ran 2.4 kilometers within 12 minutes, walked 4 kilometers within 35 minutes. We would do push-ups within 2 minutes, which were 36 push-ups, as well as 46 sit-ups within 2 minutes and some shuttle runs. And thereafter, we would do bleep tests, obstacle courses. And I remember throughout that week, slowly my body was starting to wear out as it became more tired. But also I could feel a little bit of, yes.
Sorry, just need to cut off. We've gone a little bit over time now. So if you could wrap up and then we can do some Q&A.
Sure, no problem, no problem. So what I had to learn at that stage was that sometimes when you're in a difficult position, the best thing that you can do is to decrease your target. So I had to walk 25 kilometers in full gear. And at that stage, my feet were starting to form blisters. And it became very, very difficult. At 10 kilometers, I remember feeling the pain that I eventually took my boots off. And instead of looking ahead, I started looking at that next step. And I focused my attention on that next step. And I made a rhyme, which I cannot repeat, but that rhyme helped to carry me through that energy. And I just pushed the focus down and with What I learned at the end of that exercise was that sometimes you need to bring that target down, bring it to something a little bit smaller, to such an extent that you just focus on the next immediate thing. And when I finally reached the finish line, which was 27 kilometers, I realized that, the one thing is that our resilience threshold is so much further
than what we anticipate. We have set. I'm sorry. We have set a smaller threshold for ourselves, and not realizing that our bodies and our minds are able to take us through the bigger to the bigger goal. So I would like to play this video, but at the risk of time, I'm just going to go over to the next one and leave you with this closing quote. And that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. We have wingmen that fly next to us, and their duty is to check our 6 o'clock as we're not able to. And as leaders, when we have wingmen, we have the ability to check each other's blind spots and to help us fix those blind spots so that we can go further together. The sky is the baseline. Thank you very much.
Mandisa?
Yes?
Who do you think you are? Your head's in the clouds.
Mama.
Do you really think you can soar to such great heights? Come now, child. There's no space for you up there. And you have no business being here.
I am going to push you. You are not supposed to be here. You should be cooking for your mother.
You think you're one of the boys?
You don't belong here.
Too pretty. Too weak.
We want to go home. Why don't you quit? I want you to play.
Why don't you know your place?
1, 2, 3.
No one expected you to get this far anyway. What makes you think you belong in the sky? What makes you so special? You, the one who dares to take up space. Who do you think you are?
Thank you very much.
Mandisa, I cannot thank you enough for your story and always sharing it with the utmost grace and passion. I do have a quick question for you that derives from some of the conversations I've been having with some of our clients. They say to me, Mel, we are 7 months in the year and we have not reached our goals, or our teams are not where we need them to be. So, Mandisa, what would you say and how would you respond to individuals that feel discouraged about their performance so far?
Yes, I think sometimes we set really big targets for ourselves. And, you know, the one thing is that targets are really nice because they give us direction and places to where we need to channel our energy. However, if we just bring those targets a little bit closer and make them into smaller milestones, it sort of gives you that encouragement. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to be able to run 25 kilometers. Instead of waking up one day and just starting that run, I would start first by saying, how far can I run? And then gauge that. And then that is where I'm going to set my baseline. So if I can only run 1.5 kilometers in a certain time, then that is my baseline. The following day, I'm going to say, I'm going to try and run 2 kilometers in the same time and then push. So sometimes we want to see continual progress, but that's not how it usually happens. Sometimes you'll move forward and then take 2 steps back. That is still progress because you push through, opened a new path,
and then take place and then look and assess, okay, how can I improve? So setting smaller milestones for the bigger goals really helps to build that encouragement, and it also helps build that momentum. So that's one thing that I could say. Break it down to smaller milestones, then you'll achieve the bigger targets.
Absolutely amazing. I love that. I think I'm going to take the bat and run with it. And I think what you really resemble is that no matter how tired we get, let us not stop running until we reach the finish line. So I absolutely love that, Mandisa. This was absolutely amazing. We have so much love from the comments. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into it. But I think as we wrap up the session, I'd like to share a reflective thought and something we are taking away as we walk out of this virtual door. I gather from what you shared and your journey is that we are all gifted, yes, but the outline of that is that we are the architects of our own destinies. And they always say it, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And you believed in the beauty of your dreams, Mandisa. I truly enjoy listening to you all the time. Thank you so much for the inspiration you shared with us today. And I know it won't be the last time we hear from you. And now on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. Mandisa, thank you so much. It was a great honor, and see you next time.